for independence, the Tan War, and the First Dáil were defining moments in our nation's history. So too the subsequent Anglo-Irish Treaty and the Civil War. The treaty divided Dáil Éireann, Sinn Féin and the IRA. It divided families and communities up and down the country. Despite browbeating by the church, by big business and the media, the treaty passed in the Dáil by a mere 7 votes. As divisions deepened, efforts to prevent civil war and to find a basis for unity among Republicans failed amid British threats of immediate and terrible war. The Free State, backed by powerful economic interests, decided to forcibly suppress their Republican opponents. On the 28th of June 1922, it bombarded the Republican garrison in the forecourts, and so began the Civil War. This event presaged a human, political and economic tragedy for our island and our people. Ireland was to endure a short but bloody and brutal period marked by assassinations, firing squads, widespread destruction, draconian repression and suffering. Republicans saw the hope of a free, united and socially just Ireland dashed. Thousands suffered imprisonment, 77 were executed officially in Free State prisons, and many more were murdered on the outside. Volunteer George McDermott was one of those murdered during the conflict. He was killed on the 5th of July 1922 during the Battle of Cllr in an engagement with the Free State Army. He was a good man, an Irish soldier and a patriot. Free State repression against Republicans like George McDermott were a brutal betrayal of the solidarity, comradeship and togetherness that drove and galvanised the struggle for Irish independence. A betrayal of the dream so poetically expressed in the proclamation. Those executed and killed lost their lives. The executioners lost us the future that was promised. The Civil War, perhaps more than any other chapter in our history, calls on us to think about how power is manifested in our country, not only in the past, but also today. To think about who has power, who wields it, and in whose interests they exercise it. To think about how all this affects the lives of ordinary people today, just as it affected ordinary families in 1922. The loss, the exploitation, the suffocation of the hope of a nation and the aspirations that people have for their lives. The relationship between war and power is a terrible one. The powerful use war to become more powerful. The powerless are often forced to take up arms, to overthrow injustice, to liberate, to fight for a better future, and for ideals beyond their own self-interest. Exploitative power, which is the nature of British rule in Ireland, will always seek a route for survival. That hasn't changed in a century. Just as the British manipulated Edward Carson 100 years ago, Westminster today manipulates political unionism in a threadbare attempt to cling to power at all costs. When the Free State aimed British guns at Rory O'Connor and his comrades in the forecourts, it was an action that reflected the survival route chosen by the British Empire to threaten, manipulate, to coerce with the aim of turning Irish person against Irish person. The Free State succumbed to that tactic. The IRA resisted it. Divide and conquer has always been the modus operandi of those who seek to dominate others. It is Ireland's great tragedy that the British were successful in this respect. Division was sown and fostered. The Civil War is typically described as strife between brother and brother, but we must remember that the Civil War, first and foremost, was the outworking of an empire losing its grip on power in a country it considered its property. It was a counter-revolution. It is no surprise that in the Ireland that took shape following that painful period, power has rarely been wielded in the interests of people of no property. Those who today struggle to put a secure roof over their heads, put food on the table and clothes on their back, they struggle despite Ireland being a wealthy country. For decades, power has been on the side of financiers, big landlords and the golden circles, and Connolly's prophecy has come to pass. While the Civil War was bitterly divisive, I don't believe those who fought it did so in the name of the Ireland that followed, or the Ireland that we have today. For whatever else might be said about the causes and the course of the Civil War, this can be said: most on both sides were motivated by patriotism, as they saw it, and did not see their goal, whether free state or republic, as a means of personal advancement in careerist politics. Most had suffered imprisonment under the British regime, or had been on the run or injured in the war. Service and sacrifice meant something to them. Nonetheless, the Civil War and its aftermath were incredibly damaging to the aspirations of our people. While the vandalism of partition split the territory of the country, it was also an attack on the very essence of Irish nationhood, an attempt to fracture the ties that in all our difference and diversity bind us together as a people. In the 6 counties, a one-party state excluded nationalists from power, denied them opportunity, and subjected them to sectarian pogrom. Essentially, it was another British system to turn the people of this island against each other. The South became a deeply conservative state which marginalised women, the poor, and political progressives. Intergenerational poverty and deprivation became embedded. Even at times of economic progress, too many people were left behind, and ordinary people were forced to pay for the reckless gambling of those at the top. All this dysfunction are symptoms of a colonial hangover, of the damaging interplay between power, war, and dominance. But power can be a force for good too, when it is used to lift people up and bring them together, rather than keep people down and divide them. There is a power in remembrance, in not forgetting, so that we can aspire to something better. When we recall those who came before us, we commemorate even the difficult chapters of our history. It is not an abstract exercise. The act of remembrance brings to life the ideals and the principles of those who wanted a better Ireland. In the past, people disagreed, and people made their choices, often with heartbreaking, bitter consequences. The debate about the Civil War will always be a part of who we are. The lesson it teaches us is that the destiny of the Irish nation can never be fulfilled by settling for less than full freedom, equality, and opportunity for everyone. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael used the misnomer of Civil War politics as a comfort blanket, as a space to occupy when their failures in the Ireland of today are called out and challenged. But people are no longer fooled by that. Because the beauty of life is that while we remember, we are not bound by the past. This generation gets to make new choices today. Choices for a new Ireland and a new future. Today we reach for the Republic in you with positivity, courage and confidence. These are interesting times and exciting times. Ireland has changed and Ireland is changing. We are living in the dying days of partition. North and South, we have a generation brimming with talent, potential and ambition. A generation that with compassion, decency and togetherness is determined to realise the Ireland denied to our parents and our grandparents before us. This generation will not settle for less. We strive again for the future that was promised. Liam Mellows believed that the Republic was a living, tangible thing, and we are closer now than ever before. We are now challenged to reach out beyond the shadow of the Civil War, to see the light of a new dawn breaking. Because Mellows was right. A nation is a living, breathing thing. It pulses through the hopes of its people, to endure, to continue, to achieve its destiny. The destiny of the Irish nation is on the horizon, Accordia. A living republic, a home to all, and that remains our goal. The achievement of the Republic is the legacy that this generation will bestow upon future generations of Irish men and women.